Hello, and welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacey Moss, the host of the podcast and the president of our management consulting firm. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we started. The Igniting Impact podcast is an opportunity to share with you what our clients do daily to impact the world. We want to highlight this essential work from the government and the work that they do for their clients and stakeholders that is changing lives despite the many challenges that they face. On today's episode, we have two guests with us, Deb and Mary Pat. I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you in a minute. They're from the Nebraska Administration Office of the Courts, and they're here today to discuss the Court Improvement Project, which we'll also call CIPs, probably a million times during this. This is a fun one for me. I've been working with CIPs my whole career and started off on the council for one and have helped support them in various different ways throughout my career, including working with Deb about 4 or 5 years ago. So let's get started getting to know you each a bit more. If you just introduce yourselves and tell us what your name and title is and what you do at the CIP program.
I'm Deb VanDyke-Ries, and I am the director of the Nebraska Court Improvement Project. And I have been with CIP, our particular project, for coming up on 8 years. I guess I just, support our team and help to provide a vision for how we can move forward in this work, both working in child welfare and in youth justice.
And I'm Mary Pat, and I'm a project specialist. I am more focused on the youth justice side, but as a team, since we're so small, we, dabble in everyone's area. So child welfare obviously is just as important, and especially since our kiddos are in both worlds.
Yeah, those dual kids who are on both sides. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you got to this. How did you get to CIP? What did you do before you came here? And why did you come here?
Well, I am a social worker by profession. And when we relocated from Kansas to Nebraska, so I'm a lifelong Nebraskan, but when I came back to Nebraska, I happened to live just down the street from the person who is starting a CASA program in Lancaster County. So she had encouraged me to join their board of directors and help get the CASA program off the ground. I was happy to do that, and then became one of the very first staff people for the CASA program. So I was the CASA director, a volunteer coordinator, and also a CASA volunteer myself for about 11 years. And that's when I really got to understand the child welfare world. So like I said, I worked for CASA for 11 years. I decided I needed to take a break from child welfare. And I actually was director of volunteers for a assisted living facility, so like a long-term care facility. So I still was working with volunteers. I love volunteers. But while I was at CASA, I had worked with the Nebraska Court Improvement Project. I was part of the local Through the Eyes of the Child team, the multidisciplinary team. And to tell you the truth, I always was like, I would love to work at CIP. And then after being a volunteer coordinator for this nonprofit, I saw that there was an opening. And at that point, the Nebraska Court Improvement Project had been associated with the UNL Center on Children, Families, and the Law. And the original director was retiring, Dr. VanDyke-Ries, who is an amazing person. And she... At that point, then the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice decided that they wanted to bring the Court Improvement Project underneath the umbrella of the Administrative Office of Courts and Probation. So they had some openings, and I applied and was hired as a project specialist. I was in that role for maybe 9 months, and then the director left, and then I became the new director, and I've been here ever since.
Let's tell our listeners what CASA is. What does it stand for and what does it do?
It stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates, and they are community volunteers that are assigned to a child or a family to advocate for the best interests of children that have been abused or neglected. They complete training. They are usually assigned just one case at a time. They meet the children, visit with the children at least once a month, are engaged in all of the other professional meetings. They write reports to the court, but they really are the eyes and ears of the judge, and bring almost like a community perspective to the case, and then really are the voice for the child in the court proceedings.
Great. Thanks for that. You want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I am an attorney, and that's how I kind of started in this world, is taking appointments in Douglas County. So I worked as a defense attorney, guardian ad litem for children and parents as well, and defense for youth and parents.
Okay. And when did you join here?
Let's see, I practiced for about a little over 18 years, and then I joined here about 4 years ago.
Okay. And what made you decide to make the switch?
Probably trauma. From, boots on the ground, dealing with child welfare cases, parents, kiddos. It does get to you.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I wanted to stay in the juvenile world. That's my passion. And I had met Deb on a trip.
Yeah.
We were looking at unified family courts, and enjoyed getting to know her. This opening came up. And honestly, if it hadn't been that she was going to be my boss, I would not have applied.
That's a good testament. I actually stopped practicing for the same exact reason. And that's how I got into consulting. Said I still want to work in the area and do policy and program work, but I couldn't keep doing it with the families. It's hard, very hard. All right. Well, let's get to know you both on a more personal level. Tell us who you are outside of work, what you like to do, and what values you live by. And either of you can go first.
Well, outside of work, I am a mom. I've got 3 kids, 2 of which live out of state and one that just returned to Nebraska to do her undergraduate work. And I am a music lover, a nature lover. I am a trained yoga teacher, and I teach yoga classes. Yes, yeah. And the values I live by are, I value relationships and honesty. I value openness. I value being a hard worker and persistence.
Good. Those are great.
I'm also a mom. I have 2 girls. One lives out of town, one's here in town. Let's see. I'm a voracious reader. I love murder mysteries. More psychotic.
You're going to say I love murder. Oh my God, Mary Pat.
Well, I was. I thought that sounded odd. So I added the mystery part in there too. I also love sports, love college sports.
You have to, being from Nebraska.
Well, you do. There's no professional sports here. But really, I love women's sports. And my biggest passion would be women's softball.
Oh, good.
Which I think in about 2 hours is the Women's College World Series 1:00 game. Yes. Which I'd love to be watching, but my boss is. So anyway, yes, the Women's College World Series is happening right now. So my husband and I are glued to the TV.
Great.
Let's see. When I think about the values part, I think kindness. That's pretty much, I think, in one word wraps it up, is being kind.
Okay, that's great. So tell us a bit about the Court Improvement Project. What is it? And just a little bit about the background for our listeners.
Sure. So the Court Improvement Project was originally funded back in the late 90s. So the U.S. government decided to give funding to the highest court of each state to conduct an assessment of the court process related to child welfare. So that's where that first kind of pot of money came to the states. And as I had mentioned earlier, a lot of states decided to keep their CIP within that an administrative office. We did things a little bit differently. But so there was an assessment that was looking at a variety of different things: timeliness for hearings, continuances, representation, what kind of model of representation is provided for children and parents, just a wide variety of things. It was, from what I remember, pretty prescriptive about what they were looking at and wanting to gather information about. And I don't really know exactly like where that came about on a federal level, and maybe you know more about that, Stacey, about how that came about.
No, but I know the other piece that they were really focused on was time to permanency. Big one.
Right.
How long it was taking, and if the court process was slowing those child welfare cases down or helping to keep them moving quickly.
Right, yes. And that continues to be, even to this day. So I guess that's one thing there is that continuity about the things that are being measured within the court process. Because I think for, at least in Nebraska, there was a sense, and still probably is to this day, there's the Child and Family Services Review that happens on a regular basis. The timeline is a little bit different each round that they do that Child and Family Services Review, but the Children's Bureau, ACF, comes in and does an assessment of the child welfare system. And so a number of years ago, when I was still at CASA, it was really looked at, that was the child welfare, the Department of Health and Human Services, their report card. Really didn't have anything to do with the courts. But as we know, the courts plays a big role in time to permanency and the process that happens in between removal of children and reunification or case closure. And so that is a lot of what CIP's work has been focused on over the years. And there's been a lot of different iterations in the state of Nebraska. There have been court observation projects where we are looking at, engagement of parents in the court process or engagement of youth in the court process. We've done a lot of work on utilizing mediation and different forms of mediation in the child welfare world. So are there pre-hearing conferences that are held at the very beginning of a case to keep everybody on the same page and share information prior to that very first court hearing? Or are there opportunities to do a deeper dive with family and extended family to understand what are the permanency options for children if they can't be returned home with that parent? I don't know that I'm really answering your question, but just to say that it started with federal funds that came to the states to do an initial assessment. Those federal funds still come to the state, and that's based on I believe on the population, I don't know if it's the population.
Kids in care.
Kids in care. Okay. So there's a formula on a federal level. And so that funding comes to us to support our work. Our state has decided to also match those funds with state dollars so we can also do work within the youth justice side. Because in the state of Nebraska, our juvenile courts hear all hearings. Yeah. And like Mary Pat was saying, sometimes it is the same families that are touching both of those systems. So
Mary Pat, what does the Court Improvement Project do on the juvenile justice side?
And I think that does make us unique among the states, is that we do have that focus. I know all CIPs look a little different when you go state to state. But, and we talk about, those crossover kiddos. But really, I would push on all of our kids.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what door they come in. They all need pretty much the same services. Their families need the same kind of helps. Mm-hmm. So, when we say we focus on youth justice, I think that just makes us well-rounded into how are we helping these families. And I would say, most of our kiddos, they want to be with their parents.
Yeah. I think everyone does, right? Look at our own kids.
Exactly. So, especially when Deb was talking about, timeliness to permanency, that always makes me tense a little bit, because being boots on the ground and defending, families, we know that services aren't always there when you need them.
Yep.
So you could be 6 months into a case and you're still waiting for your parent to get therapy. Can't reunify, but now you're 6 months on that clock. And 12 months is not very long, and it's not fair to kids.
And it's not long enough when you're talking about behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse, a lot of the issues that the families are dealing with.
Exactly.
Well, and now, so back in the day, there were, what would be considered like dirty house cases, or, some of those
Educational
neglect, which those issues are a little bit easier to remedy potentially. I mean, sometimes that's what you see, and there's a lot more going on underneath.
Just saying it's never a dirty house.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yes, exactly. But now what we're seeing is that we do have those major, mental health issues or substance use disorder issues, or those kinds of things that are much more difficult to address, support.
Right. And then the difficulty of separating poverty from neglect.
Yeah. Which is, I think, something that we are dealing with as a nation. Is we've built this system of support around essentially villainizing poverty.
Exactly.
And how do you pull that away from neglect? And really, is it that we should be involved in neglect, or should we only be involved with abuse? That's a big question, I think, going around right now. So tell us a little bit about who's on your team at CIP, and about your committee, and kind of how you're organized, who you work with every day.
Sure. So we have 3 project specialists as part of the CIP team, and then we have a design communications person and a data person. And so Mary Pat had mentioned that she's a project specialist. We have Teresa Cusick. She's also a project specialist, also an attorney that was practicing in Lancaster County in Lincoln. And then we have Steph Volkmer, who's a project specialist, and she is our education conference kind of expert. So we host a lot of educational opportunities throughout the year, and her expertise is invaluable when it comes to those opportunities. And then Tracy Weber is our design communications public information officer. She comes to CIP with a history in print media and newspaper. And so she doesn't like this, but she makes things look pretty for us and very, attractive to who our audience is. And then we have Brandon Herden. And so he is our data research person, and has a lot of, he has a skill set that none of us have. And it's invaluable to our team because, when I first started at CIP, I was like, data, I don't get data. I don't understand how to read this. I don't understand what it's trying to tell me. Over time, I have learned. And now it's like, if we do a project, we need to have that data to help support what it is that we're doing, and to be able to track, measure, monitor kind of the impact of the project.
It works or not.
Yes.
And adjust or keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. Or show something's a problem.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the committee or council that you guys have.
So the Supreme Court Commission is a commission. Members are appointed by the Supreme Court. It is a multidisciplinary group. We meet twice a year. It is led by 2 judges. So we've got Judge Francie Reedman. She's on the Court of Appeals, and Judge Roger Heidemann. He is a Lancaster County juvenile court judge. There are other judges that are also a part of that commission, and they do represent, we have to have statewide representation. So we've got county court judges, we've got district court judges, and then other juvenile court judges. We have attorneys that wear a variety of hats. So we've got a DHHS attorney, parents defense, GAL. Sometimes that's one and the same. and then county attorneys represented. And then we have our the CEO or the director of DHHS. We have probation administration. We have the foster care review office, the attorney general's office, just kind of all of those state entities, the Nebraska CASA Association. And then we have a variety of different service providers, psychologists. It's just trying to take a snapshot of anyone that might have some involvement with the child welfare or the youth justice system in the state. We have them involved. The thing that I'm super excited about is that just in the last year, we were able to get representation from individuals with lived experience.
Oh, wonderful.
So we have 2 parents that had previous involvement with the child welfare or the youth justice system. We have 2 foster parents, either current or former foster parents. And we have 2 seats for youth with lived experience. But I will be honest, we've had a hard time filling those seats.
Okay.
And so that's something that we are actively working on because it's important. We need to have the voice of people who have walked through this process at the table.
Yeah, we've been trying to do the same, trying to find consultants that have lived expertise and experience because it I think informs, right? Informs, and there's a way of connecting there that we can't do if you haven't been there. So what's the mission of the commission?
The mission of the commission is to really be that way to, in a statewide way, bring everybody together, get consensus on what top issues are, and then also be almost like this conduit from our subcommittees. We have a variety of subcommittees that have a different focus. That conduit between those subcommittees and the court, the Supreme Court. So what has come out of those subcommittees has been updated attorney standards, updated guardian ad litem report templates, building case progression reports for judges, so those kinds of things. So that commission is that conduit, but it is also a way for relationships to be built, a way for there, to be information shared, to be a sounding board for different ideas, initiatives, to issue spot, and to, just show that the work that is being done in the child welfare, juvenile justice, juvenile court system is important enough that there needs to be a Supreme Court commission focused on those issues.
That's great. Mary Pat, do you want to tell us about Through the Eyes of the Child? And I will say this is very unique to Nebraska. And I've thought it's a really great way to bring in those local communities in a way that a lot of other state CIPs have not been able to do. So I'm excited for you to share it.
It really is. We have, I think, 25 teams, including tribal, and they're based on our districts. And they're multidisciplinary teams. And, each one is different in each community. Usually you have, county attorneys, defense attorneys, guardian ad litems, HHS, probation, hopefully education at the table if you can get it, therapists, psychologists. I mean, kind of what we said about the commission, if you touch a child, we want you in the room. And then money. You want money at the table too, because we all know that you can't throw enough money at kiddos to get them back home.
So what's the mission of those groups?
The mission is really to look at your community and see what issues are you having? Where do you think you can help families before they become system involved? Does that start in the classroom, at the school? Does it start, in the summer with youth projects? It's, every community is so different. We have such a difference between urban and rural here in Nebraska that what works in Douglas County, which is our largest county, is certainly not going to work in, western Nebraska at all. And a lot of it is building, like Deb said, building on relationships. If you get everybody in the room and you got pizza in front of you and drinks and you're chatting, that's gonna be outside of that room as well, at the grocery store, at the library, wherever you run into people. And that just helps, I think, generate ideas for, how can you touch more families in your community? We've had some just incredible projects that have come up through these ICE teams, as simple as Come to the Table project, which is basically getting families to eat at least one meal together. That used to be the norm, but it's really not anymore. And, for a variety, I think, of reasons with families, but that was a huge push. And I think that's going to, COVID, interfered with that, but that's going to come back. We've had lots of great educational projects come out of these teams involving law enforcement. We've got a couple counties right now having sheriff deputies go in and have lunch with the kids.
Oh, good.
The story goes, the first time the deputy came in, the school's like, oh, what's is something wrong? And they're like, no, just thought I'd come have lunch with the kids. And they love it. They absolutely love it. And they're trying to, kind of spread that. Our judges, especially out west, cover more counties, 5, 10, depending on where they're located. So, they try to move up county by county and just to get that buy-in.
Food always works.
It does.
So tell us why CIP is necessary or why we need it in the system.
That's a good question.
Coming from boots on the ground, you're always putting out fires. You're touching families, and obviously so important because you are impacting the family in front of you daily. Yeah. Whether you're getting back into court, having a family team meeting, you're impacting it. But because you're so involved there, it's hard to see the big picture. Mm. And if you don't see the big picture, you don't see where your problems are, systemic problems in the system. And I think that's where CIPs come in, because from data, which it makes me shudder, that is how you get to see the big picture of, yeah, that's great. You're impacting those families. And obviously what, those attorneys, those CASA, the probation, they're doing what they need to do. But if we are looking at the numbers, we can show where this isn't working. This area is not working.
So moving from that micro level to the macro level and starting to identify what those systematic themes are, or systematic issues are that can be fixed and addressed.
Exactly. And, and as we all know, especially in government work, it's not fast.
Never in child welfare.
It is never fast. I used to tell my clients, are you familiar with molasses?
Yeah.
Put it in the refrigerator and now try to pour it out.
Yeah. That freezer.
Yeah. Because they're like, how fast can I get my kid? Well, court is not fast. But, the same goes for at our level now, at the macro level. It's not fast. To change minds, to change hearts is not fast. And sometimes, as Deb will attest, it's like beating your head against the wall. But if we're not there beating our head, it's not going to change.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, so internally, we regularly talk about the fact that I really see us as Switzerland. We're neutral, but we are a convener, and we have taken the time to build relationships, and I think trusted relationships. So if we're talking, we can bring people together, maybe not all the time, but I think that we can make those connections and say, oh, well, you were talking about this here and you were talking about this here. Because we can work better if we're working together, and we can get so much more done. And so that's I think another key thing of what we do, like our role. And I know it's not pretty and fancy and, flashy, but I really feel like it's a critical role because people don't do it, because we get stuck in our silos. And you just deal, kind of like what you were saying, Mary Pat, you deal with what is in front of you, because that's the crisis in front of you. And so for us, since we don't have things that are crises that we're dealing with, we can kind of take that step back, that macro approach, and then be purposeful about, bridging conversations, bridging relationships, but then also continuing to be the one that continues to push. I was sharing with you earlier about a project that I'd been working on, and you were aware of it like 4 or 5 years ago. And I was like, yeah, we finally got that done. But, it's like if I guess maybe to toot our own horn a little bit, if we weren't here, that project probably would have dropped.
Gotten done.
And so, it's just that one foot in front of another, but also not coming necessarily with an agenda of our own, other than to say, we want all of these processes to work better for kids and families that are being impacted by them. And that is our goal. That is the goal, and if we need to kind of have some of those hard conversations, then that's what we need to do. But it's not like we're doing it to benefit us. We have a much higher purpose.
Yeah, it's really focused on the kids and the families in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's change gears a little bit to impact. So one of our core values at PK is impact. And we've really created this podcast around it because it's so important and essential to our work. We don't want to be doing work that isn't having a positive impact. And so impact to us means that we approach every engagement with our energy focused on identifying the right goals, outcomes, and strategies, and that we each have a personal responsibility to make a positive impact on our projects and our world. I'm curious what impact means to you. How would you define it? And what does it mean for you personally?
So for me, impact means that I'm just thinking that the impact that I want to see that I have had will outlast me. That it will be something that, when I'm gone from this work, that there will be just something left to say that, okay, that was work that was started maybe when Deb was here, but it is still having an effect, a positive effect, and again, it's all about kids and families, and that, that kids are, kids and families are getting the help that they need at the time that they need it in the way that they need it. And not that I can impact all of those things, but I can have a little piece of it. And so I don't know that I'm really answering your question, but it's like that's just kind of
legacy, and
exactly
whatever small impact you can have, it's going to have a bigger impact downstream
right
too.
Right, yes, yeah. And I and personally, that's what I hope with my kids too, that my kids are good humans, that they are socially responsible, that they are politically involved and engaged, that they have people that love and care for them, and that they love and care for others, and that they are, engaged in their community. That's hopefully the impact that I will have personally, that my husband and I will have personally for our kids.
And as a mother and a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Pat, what about you?
When I think of impact, we talk about data and research so much, and that does drive some of our work. But really, when I think about it, even if I impact one child, one family, that's enough, because it's that child. Mm-hmm. And that child is just as important as the 20 over in the other section of whatever that issue is.
Yeah.
And I guess the same with my family as well, is, as Deb said, that they're good, thoughtful people, that they're, I'm going back to my, kindness.
Yeah.
And that they're just good humans.
Yeah. If you're kind and they're kind, they have that kind of ripple effect. Right. Okay, good. So what do you think, or what are you hoping to see change in the court system in Nebraska or in the child welfare system as a result of your work at CIP?
Right now, I think we're on the cusp of something really exciting. And my hope is that CIP can have a big role in that. And that is looking at how do we engage the court system, court stakeholders that have historically really been focused on the parameters within the court system. How do we have them start looking more upstream, and how can they be engaged in prevention and supporting prevention? And that can look a variety of different ways. It could be that there is a judge and there's a protective custody hearing, and they are asking questions about what reasonable efforts have been engaged to prevent this family from coming into the court system. And they're aware and knowledgeable of what those local reasonable efforts prevention services are, where they can truly say, have you tried X, Y, or Z? And having a role in maybe not closing the front door, but just asking more questions about what are those cases that are coming into the court system, and are there ways to support families beforehand? Also having the court and legal community help with convening other community partners, or being a part of other community work that's happening already, and understanding their place in that work.
Okay. Anything else?
I would kind of piggyback off of that, of just seeing all of our kiddos as just kiddos, no matter what door they walk into the system. Because if you've been boots on the ground, you know that family that now may be in youth justice should have been a child welfare case.
Yeah,
almost always. Caught them, a couple years ago. And we know too that so many are missed in the education system. And again, if we had been preventative, and if they would have got the services they needed as a first grader, as a second grader, we wouldn't be wondering why this seventh grader can't read, and why they're getting in trouble in school. Well, if I can't read, I don't want to be in school either.
Yeah, no, that's a hard place to be. So let's, who would you say are your constituents, and who are you trying to impact? So obviously we know we're in Nebraska, but more specifically for CIP, who are you most focused on impacting?
Judges, I think, they're a key constituent of ours, especially when it comes to education, and developing different educational opportunities. So that's one. Attorneys are another constituent, whether it's, again, related to education, caseworkers, probation officers, CASAs. I mean, it's hard to say it's just one, because that's the other thing that I love about the model that we work under, is that we're not developing education just for one group. We want everybody that's working within the juvenile court setting to hear the same information, to attend the same trainings and education, to help with building relationships, with sharing resources, all of those things. So I think that, yeah.
Mary Pat, what type of trainings and information and education are you guys focused on right now?
Well, we have some ICWA modules coming up that actually focus on the Indian Child Welfare Act, kind of the history behind it, and then, how does it impact the families. We also worked with Education Rights Council. That's a nonprofit here in Nebraska. And again, I push education a lot. That's my huge passion for kiddos. But, so many of those kiddos get missed in the education system. And I feel I'm pretty well educated, but I tell you, sitting in my first IEP meeting with a family,
it's rough.
It was rough.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. And that was, I was the guardian ad litem. So it wasn't like my heart and soul was at the table as if it was your child. Mm-hmm. I can't even imagine being able to think. And then, of course, you go in and you think you can trust all the adults in the room. And I'm not saying you can't, but
not always.
Not always. And that's your kiddo. And, schools are supposed to provide certain services, and they need to provide them.
I love that you brought that up, because I actually, in my practice, represented kids in IEP meetings and 504 meetings. And then my son got a disease, and I had to advocate for him in an IEP and 504 meeting. Completely different. I knew exactly, I knew the law, I knew how to advocate, but as a parent in that situation, when you're overwhelmed by emotion and fear and concern for your kid, it is not an easy system to go through. So,
well, in the education, it's a whole different language.
Yeah.
And I don't know it very well, but it's just
the body of law is so huge.
So huge. And you can't, and even I knew it professionally, but being in there as a parent is so different. And then I think about all the parents that are in there that don't know it and don't understand the law and don't understand what's happening. And it's very scary. Very scary.
It is scary. I'm trying to think the education that we are doing. We did a reasonable efforts panel for judges that, as you know, is huge.
Yeah.
And again, that really starts at prevention as well.
Are you guys seeing the judges finding more no reasonable efforts after that, or at least asking more questions?
I think they are asking more questions, and especially out west. I think sometimes the disconnect was, the judge thinking, I know I don't have that service. Well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, they still have to find it.
Exactly. They have to find it. They have to provide it.
Mm-hmm.
So stop giving grace to Health and Human Services. Sorry.
Yeah.
But, we're, like we said, those kiddos want to live with their mom and dad. Yeah. We got to get them there if we can get them there.
Are you guys seeing more or less kids in care, more or less kids reunified, especially after COVID?
There was there was definitely a dip during COVID. And then after COVID, now it's kind of ramping back up again. When you look at the federal benchmarks for reunification at 12 months, reunification, adoption, guardianship, 24 months, we are doing better on that 24-month permanency marker. The 12-month reunification, we inched up a little bit, but now we have dipped back down. And so that is an area of focus for the state to look at, what's underlying that.
Yeah. Do you think it's service availability or courtroom time? Like, what do you...
It's service.
Yeah.
And I know we're not alone.
No.
Not everybody's having the same.
Well, especially
issues.
Rural and frontier areas are so hard.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so hard to get services in place on what families need. How can you reunify if you're still waiting for therapy or family therapy?
Yeah.
And therapists are overwhelmed. They have huge waiting lists, and they're overwhelmed as well.
I think the other thing that we are also struggling with is that in the Eastern Service area, there was privatization, and that went on longer. So there was privatization across the state. There was a number of years. When they first did the privatization contract, I can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't.
It's been a while.
Yeah. And then it just landed in the Eastern Service area. So it was there the longest. In Douglas County, Sarpy County, so that's our Omaha area, and that contract shifted from one provider to another. So if you look at the number of caseworkers on those cases, you've got a lot of caseworkers that I think also impacts permanency. If you don't have consistency in that casework, then how is the county attorney going to be able to call a witness for a termination of parental rights, or what I mean? It's just like, it just complicates
the
things.
caseworker getting enough services and knowing the family enough to know what they need.
Relationship building.
Yeah.
They
trust them.
Exactly. The trust factor is just not there if you're on caseworker number 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or 10. Yeah, really. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of, that's just what we have to work with. Those are the parameters that we have to work within. And I do think that, with case management coming back to the state, hopefully that will provide some stability I mean, we'll see how that all plays out, but I think that that's a part of it too.
Okay, so each quarter our podcast has a theme, and our theme this quarter is adaptability. And so adaptability is defined as the ability to adjust to different conditions or circumstances. So when you think about your day-to-day job and CIP, what do you think about when it comes to adaptability, or what emotions come up for you? I'm watching your faces.
You start, Mary Pat.
We are very adaptive.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
Things come up all the time here. We all have our section of teams that are out in the district. So it could be something there. It could be, somebody calling in. It could be a judge needing research a little bit. That's even though I practiced, I love the research side. So I have a few friends on the bench and they know that I love that side. So I might get a little side job there, which I appreciate. I'm trying to think.
Is it constant, like day to day, or?
I don't think so. It might impact the higher level director job more than mine of being adaptable. She gets called into a lot. More meetings that sometimes she, will farm out to us because there's only one of her. And again, that just helps us know what's going on in the state and who maybe needs to be at the table.
Yeah.
Or what information to share out more rural, Nebraska.
And I think that when I think about adaptability, I also think about flexibility. And so it's like maybe I don't know why flexibility sounds better to me, just being, because to me, then it also, there's some openness to it, openness to kind of like rolling with it a little bit, being, not being rigid in that, okay, today, I mean, sometimes I have to have those days where it's like, okay, I can't do anything else because there are things that I need to get done. But I also, when I think about adaptability or flexibility, I also think about opportunity. And, sometimes it's like if you're open to doing something that maybe is not what you originally intended, that there are opportunities that present themselves to either dig deeper in a certain area or build a relationship or, those kinds of things.
So what have you had to be adaptable or flexible about in the last year in Nebraska CIP?
Well, I think we're constantly having to be adaptable to our teams and meeting our teams where they are. Not
through the eyes.
Are through the eyes of the child teams, yes. So like we could go to a through the eyes meeting and think, okay, we want X, Y, or Z, discussed. And we get there and it's like the team is having this amazing conversation about something that is not what we were wanting to discuss, or focus on. But it's like, but you meet them where they are because they know their community best. They know the needs, their wants, their wishes. And so we have to be flexible or adaptable in how we support them. And I do think that, we don't have a lot of, we aren't impacted a lot by the legislature, but I do feel like being housed underneath the Administrative Office of Courts and Probation, I feel like sometimes we get some residual, effect of the legislative session and how there is a lot of like, I need your feedback on this particular bill by tomorrow because we have to develop a fiscal note or we need to understand the impact of it in a variety of ways. So I feel like, especially during legislative session, and I look to Mary Pat because she's really involved in the kind of reviewing all of the bills and doing that deeper dive and discovery about what the impact might be.
Well, and talking about legislature, if there's an emergency clause, and there's a change in the law, your judges need to know about that.
Yeah.
We have a lot of new judges on the bench right now. So that, is a huge push of, think of the top 5 things, you want new judges to know because they're overwhelmed now.
Yeah.
But again, 12 months to permanency, what other markers do we need to hit? And those judges need to know what those federal guidelines are as well. That, as a boots on the ground attorney, that didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah.
I didn't care about federal guidelines. I want therapy for my kiddo.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I want. And I want Health and Human Services to pay for it. And I want it yesterday. Yeah. That's not really in our world right now. Today, it's more how do I get this new legislation, education out there to judges so that they know tomorrow when this goes into effect, they know what kind of changes that has, an impact for them on cases.
How did your court system adapt during COVID?
Beautifully, I would say. I didn't really.
That's amazing.
They really did. I mean, obviously there are always snafus because, we didn't, some courts didn't have the Wi-Fi or, the computers or whatever, but our courts stayed open.
And just moved virtual?
Well, they moved virtual or they moved across the street into the basement.
Oh.
Out in rural, it just, they talk about adaptable. They were adaptable. I remember this, and I can't remember what judge, and I don't want to say names, but I remember the story. He parked his car on one side of the bridge. Yeah. He couldn't get over the bridge, so he walked, and one of his staff met him on the other side so he could have court. I know.
It's amazing.
And that was related. There was some major flooding that happened in northern Nebraska, and there was some big bridges, like lots of damage. Yes. And so big bridges that would normally connect, to this community were flooded out. And so it's like, he was.
And it just so happened at the time as COVID too.
Right.
Yeah,
yes.
It was at the same time. But back to just COVID, it was such a learning curve, but also some of the, it's hard to say what positives came out of COVID because it was tragedy. But some of those Zoom hearings that still take place, are happening because of what we learned. Yeah. And, just to save time on everyone's end, it does make the case go quicker. And that is what we want. We all know the more your case get touched in court, the quicker you're going to move. Mm-hmm. If that judge thinks you're doing well, you're going to get to that next step. But and I think our technology going west is there's a huge project of getting better technology in our courtrooms right now as well. But during COVID, our doors stayed open. Hearings took place, not like they did. Your priorities, of course, had to be made as well. But our judges were on the bench.
That's amazing. And I'm really glad to hear that they're still continuing because it is such a good way to have those court hearings when parents are working and kids are in school and there's, lots of places to drive to get to the courtroom.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, but parents working. Mm-hmm. We had parents who normally, as I'm sure impacted your cases as well, you're like, well, mom said she would be here, but you and I both know that mom was going to lose her job if she had to miss work for court. But now if she can appear by Zoom on her lunch break, she's there. It has a huge impact on cases.
Yeah, huge. And I think it's so great to hear that so many states have kept that going.
Well, and then transportation. Yeah. And again, we're talking poverty. Yeah. Is that impacting the case? Mom, and I say mom because unfortunately a lot of them, is mom. She doesn't have a car. She's busing it. Yeah. And that takes a long time. That could be 3 transfers.
Time, money, yeah.
Exactly. And what if she's got an infant at home? You really you want her to drag that little baby? Yeah. No, we don't. But if she can appear on her phone at home, that's what we want.
That's great. So one of our aspirational values at PK is progress. And so really we're focused on what's the collective power of that impact, right? From one project to the next or one effort to the next. And we want everything to build upon it, right? Advancing towards leaving the world better than when we started. And really that's our ultimate reward for the work that we do. And I'm curious how you feel like you've done that at CIP. Do you feel like that kind of drive to progress is occurring over time? Has it been challenging, or do you feel like it's driving ahead very well?
I'll share an example of where I think that I have seen that progress over time. I had mentioned that there was some evaluation of the court system that started, the CIP programs. And ever since then, Nebraska CIP has continued an iteration of that. So when CIP was with the Center on Children, Families, and the Law, they did court observation. They were looking at kind of the quality of hearings that were happening. They did interviews with parents, with other stakeholders. I believe Dr. Weiss even published, an article about it. And then when I came on to CIP and we had a different research and data person involved with our project, we were doing court observation again. This time we were looking at judicial engagement with the parents and with children that are in the court system. And, we were able to kind of glean from that really didn't matter whether it was rural or urban or even how long the hearings were. But overall, the judges did a good job of engaging parents. But what came out of that is that we noticed that there were very few, if any, children and youth that were engaged in that court proceeding. So that has kind of brought us to this next iteration of our court observation, or our kind of that continuous assessment. I don't really want to say assessment, but kind of understanding what the practice is across the state. And so now we are looking at doing a similar project where we are determining, are children and youth attending hearings? And if they are attending hearings, what are the parties engaging with them? And trying to understand what that baseline is, so then we can determine if there's progress, or if there are interventions that we need to engage in order to change that. Because research shows that if youth are participating in their hearings, number one, there's a better sense of procedural justice. Number two, they're aware and understand. There's a sense of there's a philosophy that we need to protect kids, especially kids that are involved in the child welfare system, and that if they come to hearings, then they're going to be re-traumatized or be upset or those kinds of things. But what we have been hearing, and what we've also researched, is that that's not the case.
Complete opposite.
It is. And so part of what I think I'm hoping that we can do is do some myth busting, so we need to have that baseline first. Hopefully we can identify those areas of the state where they are engaging children and youth in the proceedings. We have identified some judicial champions that can help us with kind of moving this work forward, but it's going to be this continual process of people having different experiences, and then seeing maybe we can do this a little bit differently.
Yeah, the research is so clear on that. And you hit on some of the high points. And the other ones is the professionals act differently, right?
Yes.
They act differently when there's an actual child with a name rather than case, 2024.
Right.
And I think the other piece is all the research shows kids go home quicker because they're there, they're engaged, the parents are engaged. There's just so much more focus. So,
and the other thing that I always, so this dates back to my CASA days, and where we would put pictures of the kids on the front of our CASA reports, because it's I would see the kids on a regular basis, and I would see, especially with little ones, how quickly they change, and that child sense of time. And so, if you have kids in court, and so when the case first opened, they were a little baby and an infant, in a carrier. And then 6 months in, they're sitting up, and then another 6 months, they're walking around the courtroom. That's huge change. And if you see that for yourself, that makes an impact.
Yeah, it does. And I think makes an impact on your decision making too. So I think the other piece around progress is that, I always think about progress being lessons learned. It's really connected, right? So we learn by making mistakes and learn by successes. And sometimes we learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. And so I'm curious if there's any kind of lessons learned that you would share with your colleagues at other CIPs in other states or other stakeholders or constituents in other states that you'd like to share, either of lessons learned that worked and lessons learned that didn't, things that you think they should be focused on.
Well, I think it's really what everyone has learned is that we don't know what's best for families. They do. So we need to be asking, which kind of piggybacks on getting the kiddos in court, because it's not just parents who know what they need, kids know what they need too. And it just all goes, wrapping that lived experience into, we need to tap into that more. We need to find out what families need from us, not what we think we need to do to fix them. They know what they need. We need to ask, and then we need to provide it.
Yeah, and part of that asking is building that trust and engagement first so that they're willing and feel comfortable and safe to tell you, right? Because that's the other half of it is they're scared and they don't trust everyone in the system.
And I think to kind of add on to that, although it takes time to build relationships, you benefit from that so much. I mean, return on investment is huge if you take the time to build relationships and build that trust, whether it's with families, whether it's with other professionals, whether it's with legislators, community, whoever it might be. And I think also, we live in a society that is very divided in terms of our values and what's important to us. But I truly believe that we have so much more in common, things that we each want. And so if you can take the time to figure out, what is important to that person and how is that connected to what I'm doing or what I am hoping to do, I think that you can get so much further than if you just focus on everything that is different.
Yeah, we've become so polarized in so many areas. So I love that we do all have so much more in common than people see. And if we can bring that polarization back to the middle.
I think one of the lessons learned, though, is that for a time I just thought, okay, well, I just want our CIP team to do work and try to then go out and do it, and not having the right people at the table. And so I guess it's related back to the conversation, to relationships, but, I've seen projects fail and stall because we haven't engaged the right people. And so I think that's frustrating, but it's also a lesson learned. And so it does come back to what Mary Pat was saying about, really engaging individuals with lived experience. And I will say that we've failed at times. We haven't brought individuals with lived experience to the conversation, or we haven't been able to remove barriers to have them be engaged in the work that we're trying to focus on, which also includes providing compensation for individuals with lived experience to work in this work. I think that's something that I have learned that has to happen, because every other professional that is at the table is getting paid for their time.
Yep.
So why is it that a person with lived experience is not getting paid for their time and getting reimbursement for childcare and for transportation and all of these other things that they are having to, address when they leave the work that we're doing?
Well, and I think it goes back to what you said, Mary Pat. if we're not asking, if we're not seeing them as the expert on their life and their experience, then we don't see them as a professional. And so we don't treat them as such, right? And I think that's been a mistake that systems have made in the child welfare world for a long time. And some are fixing it and some are still trying, but it is a lesson learned for sure.
And I think we have to recognize too, they're not going to come to us a clean slate.
No.
I think,
and how do we expect them to?
They have lived experience.
Yeah.
So we can't ding them for that. That's why we want them at the table. So we're going to have to make some allowances and embrace their differences because we need them at the table.
Yeah.
And be open to receiving criticism about what their experience was in the system.
Because again, we learn from our failures.
Right.
Yeah. And we have to understand them and know them in order to improve.
Right.
Any other lessons learned before we wrap up today?
I think that it's important to be courageous and sometimes take risks, even though we work in a really risk-averse setting. And there are times that I have said yes to things and then had some ramifications from that, because it didn't sit well with others who have much more authority than I do. But I just, and I own that. And I then figure out, how do I learn from that? How do I identify other champions? I always say, I might have a message, but I might not be the messenger. And so how do I find somebody else who can be the messenger, maybe a similar message, but how, that's what I learned from those kind of, those situations, is that for me, it's not necessarily no, don't ever do that. It's more not now.
Yeah. Right.
And
time,
then,
right
yes,
person.
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So we built this podcast, I told you, around one of our 3 core values, impact. But to close out every podcast, we do a fun little activity on our other 2 core values. So our other 2 core values are inclusion and teamwork. And so what we're hoping is that you'll just share a bit of your wisdom with our listeners about these 2 values with our audience. And so I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. But what I'm going to do is ask you about your best advice for achieving these 2 things. So are you guys ready? And either of you can go first. You can take turns, however you want to handle it. No wrong answers. Okay, so the first one is, what is your best advice for achieving high levels of inclusion in the workplace?
I think being open, transparent, being, willing to listen to all perspectives.
I think to going and finding it.
Yeah.
And bringing it into your workplace.
Good. Okay. All right. And then the next one is, what is your best advice for achieving high levels of teamwork in the workplace? And I'm excited about this one because you guys have a very close team. So give us your secrets.
Well, we found out that most of us are introverts. We did a team building and we found, I know.
Oh, that's amazing.
It really is. And I think part of that was just seeing we did that, one of those personality tests. And that was such an eye opener because, everybody learns differently. You react differently to things. So kind of seeing, they're not all correct, but, they hit a lot of the good high points. So maybe you were coming at this person wrong. Yeah. So it's just nice to know a little bit more. And, there were a lot of laughs, about that too. We all recognize that in each other, but yeah, we are such a small team. That it goes back to being open, being constructive. If you're going to, I hate to use criticize. It's just, giving, feedback. Yes. Yeah. And doing it in a nice way and being open to receive it, as it's intended and not, hopefully not getting feelings hurt. But if you do, saying it, saying that hurt my feelings. And again, we're so lucky because we are a small team. It's easier to have that trust in that relationship that you can give that kind of feedback.
For me, I think that, I guess what I have hoped that has happened within our team, and Mary Pat, you can correct me if this is wrong, but whenever there has been somebody that has been joining our team new, like even in the interview process, I mean, we talk a lot about teamwork, that we are a small team, we're small but mighty, we're Switzerland, you know, I mean, we talk about all of those kinds of things. And the whole team is involved in that interview process, you know, because we are a small group. I think that it's important that you have opportunities to build relationships outside of just the work. So I really look at it as that we're not only working together, but we're doing life together, because it's like Mary Pat and everybody has a life outside of work. And I think if you don't just kind of put it out there and say, you know, we all have had life events that have happened to us, but it's like the thing that I have loved is that I felt like this team can take on anything. We just support each other. So I think that it's, you know, understanding that we are full people, that we are not just our work people, but we are full human beings that have other things going on in our lives, and that we give each other grace when we have those things going on, but we have fun together, and we have like little jokes between each other, and we specifically set aside time. Well, we do we call it strategic. I mean, we get together like at least twice a year where we leave the office. We have a full day of, and there is some work, you know, it's like a lot of work. Yeah. Strategic planning, self-assessment, you know, like some of those things that have to happen, but we do it in a setting outside of our office. There's food involved. There's fun like Teresa on our team, she loves to have like little, how do we get to know each other games. Like there was one game that we did where it's like you had to pick your favorite song and say why it was your favorite song. You know, just different things like that
get to know you better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this starts from the top down, is that all of us know that we work to live, not live to work. And I think if your boss doesn't have that attitude, it's hard for you to have it. And my boss definitely has that attitude.
Yeah, that work-life balance is huge. And I think it's especially huge after COVID. I think the world realized, right, that working day in, day out is not necessarily good for us and what anyone wants anymore. I think that is changing in the workforce as well. That's great. Thank you both. So I can't thank you both enough for being here with me today and for your time today. It's been a precious privilege to be here with you, to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time, this is Stacey signing off.